Muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí en este momento tan especial en el que tenemos la suerte de recibir a un invitado que no siempre está presente por estas latitudes. Entonces reitero a todos, tanto a los alumnos como a los profesores, como a los invitados que han venido con el señor Harris, por acompañarnos aquí. Una breve presentación de David Harris me parece que se impone, puesto que como director del American Jewish Committee constituye una figura relevante dentro de tanto la política norteamericana como la política internacional y como los temas que en nuestra carrera y como profesores y como alumnos nos preocupan. David Harris es, como dijimos, director ejecutivo del American Jewish Committee. Ha dirigido esta institución desde 1990. Tenemos algunas opiniones relevantes de la personalidad de David Harris. Shimon Peres dijo: David es el canciller del pueblo judío. Como tal, ha sido invitado a disertar en algunos de los foros más prestigiosos del mundo, por ejemplo, el foro de Davos. Ha testificado muchas veces ante el Congreso de Estados Unidos, en la Comisión de Derechos Humanos de las Naciones Unidas, en el Parlamento de Francia. Desde luego que posee numerosas condecoraciones y ha trabajado enormemente y realizado grandes esfuerzos a nivel internacional en torno a los derechos humanos y a la colaboración transatlántica en torno a las problemáticas del pueblo judío. Su producción, que se menciona aquí, pero seguramente hay otra, y hay todo un lado académico que aquí no figura, del cual hemos hablado un poquito ahora, pero hay una producción periodística que ustedes deben conocer, así lo pueden seguir. David Harris escribe regularmente en el Huffington Post, el Jerusalem Post, El País de Madrid y La Opinión de Italia. Por cierto, desde hace ya unos cuantos años, tiene un spot semanal en CBS que llega a millones de oyentes en los Estados Unidos. Me parece que, para no tomar más tiempo, es un perfil ajustado a sobre todo la personalidad pública y más llamativa que tiene nuestro invitado de hoy. David, muchas gracias por estar aquí. The floor is yours. Please.
Muy buenos días a todos. Perdóname, hablo poco español. Hablo italiano a casa, pero italiano y español no son la misma lengua. Entonces, hablaré en inglés. I'm sorry. Good morning. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for the warm welcome introduction. Thank you, Rector, for being with us this morning. It's an honor to be at the Ort University, the only Ort University in the world. I know Ort very well. My family was very active for many years in Ort, and I salute the university and its students and faculty. Can you understand me so far? Yes? The advantage is that in my family, I'm the only one who is a native English speaker. My wife, my mother, my father, my grandparents were all refugees. So I always had to speak English clearly to them. Otherwise, they could not understand me, their son, their husband, their grandson at all well. I also want to introduce to the faculty and students at Ort University the members of our delegation, our American Jewish Committee delegation, who are here from different parts of the United States. Uruguay is the first stop. From here, this evening, we go to Santiago, Chile. And then later this week, we go to Sao Paulo and to Brasilia as part of our diplomatic delegation. And I would simply ask the members of our group to stand, and perhaps you can meet them after the session. Dina. So I wanted to take this opportunity this morning to speak about two things. First, I want to speak about a bit about my experience in international relations. Many of you are either faculty or students of international relations. I've been a student of international relations since the age of 14 or 15 years old, so that's quite a few years by now. I've studied international relations, I've taught international relations, but most importantly, I practice international relations every day in my professional work with AJC. And I wanted, for the benefit of the students, to share a few lessons. And secondly, I wanted to talk about a few specific issues on the international agenda now. And lastly, I'm told that you're shy. I hope that's wrong. Prove your professors wrong. I hope we have time for questions. Easy questions, difficult questions, whatever questions you have, and I'll be happy to try to answer them. If they're especially difficult, I will ask my colleagues in our delegation to answer them for me. First, when I studied international relations, some things were the same as today and some things were different. I want to talk about two or three things that are different for you, students of international relations, than for me when I was studying international relations. And I learned that your rector and I were at the same university, although I'm a bit older and I was there before him. The first thing that I find that is different in international relations today is the revolution in social media. The revolution in social media means that the opportunity for people to be engaged in international relations has broadened. From the old days of a Metternich or more recently a Kissinger to do quiet, private, behind-the-scenes diplomacy is changing. More people are becoming involved in some form of international relations through social media. Any of you overnight can become a social media company, an address, a movement. And that begins to change the dynamic because it no longer allows the traditional diplomats to do their job in private, away from the lights as they might wish. It gives people enormous power, especially in democratic societies, or sometimes in authoritarian societies. Look at the, quote, Arab Spring. Look at how social media triggered the beginning of a revolution. And look at what happened in terms of mass reach and mass appeal and mass movement. So one major change is in the area of social media. Also, connected to this, another major change is the power of NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Compared to even my years, but especially before me, when NGOs had very little power, especially international power, today if you look at certain groups like Amnesty International, Médecins Sans Frontières, Physicians Without Borders, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, a long list. They have enormous power. enormous power to shape the debate, to influence the decision makers. This is very different. And some would even say that groups like AJC, the group that I represent, and by the way, if you wish, ajc.org is our website address, and you're welcome to learn more. And AJC Global is our handle for Twitter and Facebook if you would like to follow us, including, by the way, AJC Latino, which now has more than 20,000 followers. Groups like ours have much more influence, much more access, much more voice than 20, 30, 40, 50, much less 100 years ago. A very big difference. Third big difference. Countries today, especially democratic countries, but not only, care much more about their reputation than they did. The reputational brand of a country has much more meaning and significance than it did in earlier years. Countries care. So I'll give you a real example, but to me a very funny example. The country of Kazakhstan. Now, why do I mention Kazakhstan 10,000 kilometers away in Uruguay? Because a few years ago there was a movie, Borat. Some of you remember the movie with Sacha Baron Cohen. Yes, you remember the movie? Now, this movie allegedly took place from Kazakhstan. He came to America. Before the movie opened in the United States, we received a phone call from an official of Kazakhstan. Mr. Harris, this is your friend from Kazakhstan. This is a BFF, a new best friend forever. Yesterday, I did not know he existed. Today, he was my friend from Kazakhstan. Mr. Harris, stop the film, please. What film? Why? You must stop Borat. Why should we stop Borat? Because it will do reputational damage to our country, Kazakhstan. People don't know anything about Kazakhstan. Now the only thing they will know about Kazakhstan is the movie. I said to my new best friend, Mr. Ambassador, first of all, in America, we cannot stop the film. Now, of course, he thought, he didn't say it, but I understood. Because Sacha Baron Cohen is Jewish, and David Harris is Jewish, it was obvious that one Jew could stop another Jew from showing a movie presented by Hollywood. I had to suggest that this doesn't happen in an open democratic society. And by the way, not every Jew knows every other Jew. And not every other Jew listens to any Jew. In fact, some of you may be Jewish, some of you may not, but I think you all know that Jews as a personality type almost insist on not listening to other people, on having their own opinion. So I said to my new best friend from Kazakhstan, why don't you stop trying to stop the film and see if you can turn it around in the theory that all public relations can be positive if you're clever. Turn it around. For example, create a whole tourism promotion built around Borat. Did you see the movie? Now come and see for yourself Kazakhstan. You might be surprised. Turn it around. After all, normally no one talks about Kazakhstan. Now someone is talking about Kazakhstan. Maybe it's not the film you wanted, but at least people are expressing the word Kazakhstan. Do something. Mr. Harris, I'm sorry you don't understand. This is a calamity for Kazakhstan. And that was the end of my new friendship with my friend from Kazakhstan. So countries care about their reputation. And for non-governmental organizations, for individuals, for movements, that's significant. That means that we can, to use an expression, name a country and shame the country, or conversely, we can name the country and fame it, make it famous. All of us, you, we. So these are things that I find different on the stage today, the global stage, than when I was your age, sitting in a similar seat at my university. The next thing which I've tried to learn over the years, and which has not changed, not fundamentally, is the inherent tension between the two driving forces of governments and their decision makers: interests and values. This tension between a country's interests and a country's values has always defined foreign policy and international relations. And notwithstanding the social media revolution or the NGO revolution, in many respects, this doesn't fundamentally change. Example. This month, in about 10 days, there will be the 100th anniversary of what the Armenian people refer to as the genocide of the Armenians at the hands of the Ottoman Empire. Are any of you of Armenian background? No one in the room. But you're familiar with the issue? Is there an Armenian community in Uruguay? Yes. There is. Here is a classic example for me, this month, of the tension between values and interests. And it's played out in almost every country of the world that I know, and perhaps in Uruguay as well. I'm not familiar with how the government will respond. But if you saw just this weekend, Pope Francis tweeted or spoke about the Armenian genocide. President Erdogan of Turkey rejecting the word genocide, rejecting the accusation, is now in a war of words and diplomatic differences with the Vatican. Now, President Erdogan represents a very important country, Turkey. But the Pope represents a very important global movement called the Catholic Church. That's a very interesting diplomatic drama to watch. Now, what drives the Pope? Well, I believe it was values. It was the notion that there was a genocide. Many people were tragically killed. They should not have been killed. And it is the obligation of the Catholic Church to speak out. It so happens that the people who were killed were Christians. And it so happens that those who did the killing, according to this history, were Ottoman Muslims. But now take the United States. What will the United States do in response to the Armenian genocide anniversary this month? And to me, it's not clear, or maybe it's very clear. The United States will do everything possible to avoid the word genocide. Now, this is particularly ironic because our ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, was for many years a professor at Harvard University and wrote a book which won many awards called A Problem from Hell, The History of Genocide. And her first chapters are on the Armenian genocide. Not tragedy, not murder, genocide. The key word, genocide. Now, this administration in Washington, like previous administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, will do everything possible to avoid the word genocide because interests beat values. The interests are Turkey. We don't want to get Turkey upset. We don't want to go into a diplomatic war with Turkey. Turkey is the southeastern flank of NATO. Turkey borders on Iraq, Iran, Syria. It's a critically important part of the world. It is a large, significant economy. We don't want to get Turkey angry. So I encourage you as students of international relations in the next several days to follow this, to follow each country, not just the Catholic Church, not just the United States, but Uruguay, other Latin American countries, European countries, and other nations, to see how this clash between values and interests unfolds. I can speak personally for AJC. In years past, we had real tension in our internal discussions between the values and the interests. The values demanded of us to speak on behalf of the Armenian genocide. After all, we were the people of the Holocaust. What if one day another nation came along and said, in order to do business with us, you must deny the Holocaust. You must never express the word Holocaust. And would countries, in the interest of interests, follow along? So for us as the people of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, how could we deny another people's genocide, all the more so when Adolf Hitler was reportedly, and it's still not clear, reportedly to have said in the 1930s, preparing for the Holocaust, who remembers the Armenian genocide or the Armenian tragedy? The word genocide itself did not exist until the 1940s, when a Polish Jewish lawyer named Raphael Lemkin created the word from Latin and Greek to describe something for which there had been no name in our vocabulary. Genocide was only established in the 1940s as a name, and then came the Genocide Convention and so forth. So our values spoke to supporting the Armenian community. Our interests, though, were with Turkey. Turkey was an essential partner of Israel. There was an important Jewish community in Turkey. I will say here that some Jews from neighboring countries were able to flee those countries, to escape from those countries and arrive in Turkey safely before moving on to new lives. We had a lot of interests in Turkey. This was a classic clash between our value system and our interests. But in the end, our values prevailed. With all of our interests, we understood at AJC that we could not, must not be part of any attempt to deny the Armenian people's claim to genocide, and we would do our best to separate that from our contemporary interests. In other words, that was 1915, that was the Ottoman Empire. This is 2015, there is no Ottoman Empire, although perhaps President Erdogan would like to reestablish it. That's another story. So we will do our best to separate the two. I will tell you, we have not been very successful, but we're trying, because the two for us, intellectually, analytically, are separate issues. We are not holding the Turkey of 2015 responsible for the events of 1915 in eastern Turkey or Anatolia. So there's another clash. I'll give you a third example of a clash between values and interests that I find interesting. Again, it involves, in a way, Turkey. The country of Azerbaijan in Central Asia, the South Caucasus, has been a very close friend and ally of Turkey for many, many years, both Muslim countries. The language of Azerbaijan is Turkic. It comes from the Turkish language. And yet, Azerbaijan will not support Turkey on the divided island of Cyprus. You may know for the last 41 years, Cyprus has been divided between the northern third, which is occupied by Turkish forces, and the rest of the island, which is part of the European Union and has a Greek majority. Normally, if values were the only factor, Azerbaijan would be supporting Turkey. Same religion, same culture, close friends, allies, you name it. But Azerbaijan is not supporting Turkey. Why is Azerbaijan not supporting Turkey on the island of Cyprus? This political division of Cyprus. Does anyone know why? That's why your professor is a professor. Because of a place called Nagorno-Karabakh. This is an area that was seized by Armenian forces over 20 years ago. It represents about 20% of the land of Azerbaijan, and which Armenia has occupied for the last 20 years. So what's the connection? Very simple. If Azerbaijan recognizes the Turkish occupation of the northern third of Cyprus, then it creates a precedent for the world to recognize the Armenian occupation of 20% of Azerbaijan. So here, the interests of Azerbaijan become much more important than the values of we're fellow Muslims, we're fellow Turks, we're friends and partners. They can't support Turkey. And the final thing that I wanted to say generically, from my experience, and this really goes to you, the students. So the professors and the AJC delegation are welcome to listen in, but this is not for them. This is for you. This is for the students. I've learned in the last 40 years professionally that people make a major difference in international affairs. There are these endless debates in the academic world. Do people make the issues? Do issues make the people? Who are the key drivers or factors or vectors or forces in international relations? And I'm not sure the answer will ever be definitively established, but I will tell you from my experience, individuals make a profound difference. And this is my appeal to you, my new best friends replacing my best friends from Kazakhstan. Believe in yourselves that you one day can make a difference. And with the tools of social media, and with the tools of non-governmental organizations, and with the greater openness, there's a wide space for individuals to dream big. And I believe that one of the jobs of young people, in addition to studying and getting good grades and thinking about jobs and their careers, one of your obligations, I believe, is to dream big. Big ideas, big thoughts, big changes. You may or may not accomplish everything, but I can tell you, if you don't dream big, you'll never act big. And you need to act big in order to achieve significant change. And as I look at the world in which we live, the changes have been profound. Profound. And they're all connected to individuals. Whether the change after 12 years of authoritarian rule in Uruguay, or authoritarian rule in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, whether the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism in Eastern Europe, whether the end of apartheid in South Africa, whether peace between Israel and Egypt. I can go down a very long list of dramatic events that happened in my lifetime, and I can connect individuals to each one of them. Some have prominent names, some have names we will not remember, but they all were once 19 years old, 20 years old, 21 years old. They weren't born as Nobel Prize winners. They weren't born as global architects. They were born like you and me. And my invitation to you is think big. Dream big, think big, act big, and understand, if you allow me, that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, perseverance, and persistence. It takes a high threshold for frustration, but the people who can sustain it ultimately will prevail. Had Andrei Sakharov or Natan Sharansky in the Soviet Union, or Nelson Mandela in South Africa, or Lech Walesa in Poland, or Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, I can go down the long list, or Jacob Timmerman in Argentina, had they simply given in or given up, history would have been different. They didn't give in and they didn't give up. And somewhere in this hall, I'm sure, Professor, there are potential future people of that caliber and that commitment. And finally, the word that every audience loves to hear, finally. There's a lot on the specific global situation, and I don't want to take a lot of time. I'd rather hear your questions. But I want to say one thing that particularly concerns me. And it may be perhaps more difficult to see it from the vantage point of Montevideo. This is, fortunately for you, an island of relative peace and tranquility. I wish the whole world looked like Uruguay today. I do. I mean it. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I remember with Dina Siegel-Van sitting right here, a meeting we had with the foreign minister of Brazil, who effectively was trying to tell us if the whole world could look like our world, it would be a good world. We have, I think, 9 borders. We have no conflict on any of our borders. We have a nuclear-free zone in Latin America. We have multi-ethnic, pluralistic societies that more or less get along, maybe not quite as well as Brazil would like you to believe, but still very well. So why can't the world look like South America or the southern cone of South America? Well, the problem is it doesn't. You have a lot to teach. The world has a lot to learn, and especially, of course, in North Africa and the Middle East. And it seems to me that here, and I come back to my earlier thought, the democratic world, the world of values, the community of values, the values that you may today take for granted, that we may today take for granted but never should. The world of open societies, the world of pluralistic societies, the world of gender equality, the world of free and fair elections, the world of smooth transitions of power from one government to another, the world of open inquiry, of protest, peaceful, respectful protest. That world, the world of mutual respect, is under assault, is under challenge by those who would divide us by religion or even by belief within religion, by those who would divide us by sex, by those who would divide us by nation or ethnicity or race. And what concerns me even more is that that second world is seeking to acquire weapons of mass destruction. And what happens the day that that second world that wishes to divide us and challenge our democratic values marries weapons of mass destruction. And I fear that the 21st century could be defined by how we deal with that challenge. I mean, as I look at this century, I see 3 or 4 major challenges globally, which for me, as a North American, include the US-China relationship, which will become the single most important bilateral relationship in the world in terms of managing the balance between cooperation and conflict. I see the conflict within Islam as a defining challenge of the 21st century as well. Will there be a reformation in Islam, as we've seen in Christianity and Judaism, or will there not? Who will prevail within the world of Islam and the 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet, and now in almost every country of the world? Will radical Islam acquire those weapons of mass destruction, whether in Iran tomorrow or in a new government of Pakistan or elsewhere in the coming years? And if so, what does that mean for your future and ours? Can the democratic world hold together? So for me, being in Uruguay, coming from the United States, being a friend of Israel, being a Europhile, has a common denominator. The common denominator is very simply this: we at AJC believe in democracy and democratic values. I don't mean the kind of democracy that elects Hamas to power in Gaza. And once Hamas is elected to power, it removes democracy from governance. That's not the democracy I speak of. I defined democracy earlier and its core values. Can and will the democratic world, the world of Israel, the world of Europe, the world of Latin America, the world of North America, the world of much of Asia, manage the differences which inevitably occur? Can we manage as well the clash between interests and values? Countries that want to do business with Iran, for example, but on the other hand don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Can we manage the interest-values debate and hold together as a democratic society? My belief in my lifetime is, with all the imperfections of democracy, there is no better system on earth. Not for the values of openness and pluralism and mutual respect that protect us all. And that's why at AJC, our overarching goal is to reinforce the bonds and the links and the relations among and between the democracies of the world. And in this respect, seen from this vantage point, Israel, as the only true democracy in the Middle East, a region that is collapsing before our eyes, a region in which states that the French and the British created on the backs of envelopes in 1919, and in secret agreements like Sykes-Picot, are now unraveling. States like Syria and Iraq, which were created by Western map makers. In that world, Israel's value to us goes up dramatically. So that's the way AJC sees the world. That's a few lessons that I want to share with you, students and faculty here at the Ort University after a few decades in this business. And now, please prove your professors wrong, raise your hands, and ask questions. Thank you.
You mentioned the importance countries give to reputation, so I was wondering, how can the Israeli government take advantage of the attacks on its own reputation, turning the message around?
Okay. And is there a second question? Yes, let me hear a few questions, and I'll be happy to answer. Please. Do you have a microphone?
I don't.
Here.
I'm sure that you are well aware of the recent events in Argentina with the murder or suicide of the DA, Alberto Nisman. My specific question is that do you think the Argentinian government, whether it has been the Menem administration, De la Rúa, or Kirchner, do you think they had a real commitment in bringing justice to those murder in AMIA?
Thank you. And is there one more? This gentleman in the back. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question addresses the issue of AGC's relationships with President Obama. I would like to know how's your relationship evolved throughout the years? Like, what was your expectations and your assessment of the president when he was elected, and what is your balance now that he's about to leave office?
Okay, wow.
Thank you.
Who told me these students were shy? Well, thank you very much for 3 good questions. So the first question was, how can Israel turn around its reputation, if I understood? Second question was about Argentina and Alberto Nisman and the AMI investigation. And the third question was about the relationship we have with President Obama these last 6.5 years. Okay? Dina? The Israel question for us is a very important question. Very important question. Because we have this, this extraordinary situation where the Israel that we see, that we interact with, that we know, is a very different Israel than is portrayed by many in the media, the non-governmental world, and too many United Nations bodies. So you have this complete inversion between our Israel and the way many in the world see Israel. And it would take a longer discussion to try and understand why that is. I think there are a lot of potential explanations for that, none of which are pretty explanations. So from our experience, the best way to change the reputation of Israel is actually for people to see Israel for themselves. Now, that's not easy. We can't bring 7 billion people on the planet to Israel. But we are trying at AJC, through a program we call Project Interchange, to bring decision makers and opinion leaders from many countries of the world to Israel. And so far, we have brought many thousands, literally thousands of such people. And the reason is very simple. If you simply rely on the media as your filter to explain who or what Israel is, if you simply rely on the United Nations to do so, you're going to get a very skewed or biased understanding of what Israel is. And what's so striking, after taking many, many thousands of people, almost to a person, they say the exact same thing when they return. We ask them to fill out forms about their trip. What do they say? It doesn't matter whether they're a member of Congress or Parliament, a president of a university, a Nobel Prize winner. They almost all say the exact same thing. 1, we had no idea how small Israel is. That makes its security challenges much more serious than we understood. Number 2, we had no idea how democratic Israel is. We picked up a newspaper or we went to the parliament. It's more democratic perhaps than any other nation on earth. It's almost chaotically democratic. You have communist parties, Arab parties, religious parties, secular parties, right-wing, left-wing. It's a complete, we use the word balagan, which means a mess, but a good mess. We had no idea that Muslims have mosques and can go and pray every Friday without any interruption or hindrance. That Arabic is an official language of Israel and is on every sign. We had no idea. And speaking of interest now, not values, we had no idea how much we can learn from Israel. Take a country like Uruguay, perhaps, or some other countries that are successful but still developing. You have an example in Israel of a country that had no natural resources. We just celebrated the Passover holiday, Pesach, and we would joke that Moses spent 40 years in the desert because he was looking for the only country in the Middle East that had no oil. Now, fortunately, they found gas and oil. But Israel developed its human capital. And when you look at Israel's use of human capital, It's astonishing. And many countries in the world, I believe, including countries like Uruguay, have a lot to learn from Israel's use of human capital in the areas of entrepreneurship, innovation. Look at the statistics on patents, on Nobel Prizes, on IPOs, on startups, on listings on NASDAQ and the other major stock listings. And look at Israel's size. It's unbelievable. So the best answer for us, as I told my friend from Kazakhstan, get people to Kazakhstan. Let them see it for themselves. AJC's answer, get people to Israel. Israel will sell itself. And by the way, when we take people to Israel, we take them to Ramallah. They meet with the Palestinian leadership. They meet with the Palestinian civil society. When we take them to Israel, they meet with left-wingers from North Tel Aviv, and they meet with right-wingers on settlements. And we let them make up their own mind. And you know what? Israel sells itself. That's what we learned. Israel sells itself. Our job, get people to take the trip. Once they take the trip, the reputation changes. Oy, Alberto Nisman. The Jewish expression, ay, 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 ay. Alberto Nisman was a very close friend of Dina and myself. We knew him very well. We had many meals together with him. He came to AJC and spoke many times. We visited him in his offices. We miss him. I don't have any special information on the circumstances of his murder. We very much doubted it was a suicide when the first effort to explain his death was that. All I can tell you, from the very beginning in July 1994, so what, 20 and a half years, Dina? We have been going back and forth to Argentina. I don't know how many times. In fact, Dina was just there this week again. This is a shame and a scandal for Argentina. No one, after more than 20 years, sits in jail for the worst terrorist attack on South American soil in many, many years. No one. And the investigation has been mired in so much loss of evidence, corruption, mishandling, misjudgment. What a shame. I'm not going to get into deeper issues of Argentina. It's your neighbor, and you know Argentina better than we do. But this is a country with such enormous capacity and potential, and the Nisman case, the Amia case, has only illustrated so many of the difficulties and challenges and problems that Argentina continues to face. And the last question about President Obama and us. As a matter of fact, today, there is a meeting with President Obama, and because we're here, one of our AJC colleagues will be at the White House at the meeting with President Obama. We're a nonpartisan organization, please understand, AJC. So we don't support or oppose any political party, any candidate, any president. We're about policies, not politics. There's a fundamental difference. So when we support the administration because we believe they're doing the right thing, whether on immigration reform or on support for Israel at the United Nations, or whatever the challenge may be. But if we think an administration is doing something wrong, we will say so. George Bush, he did a few things wrong in our judgment. One of them was to allow Hamas to run for the elections in Gaza. We felt it was a terrible mistake. By the way, so did the Egyptians, the Palestinians, and the Israelis. Terrible mistake. Today, we're worried about some aspects of the Obama foreign policy in the Middle East, and we're not convinced yet that the deal with Iran is a good deal. Let me be clear. We want to deal with Iran. We want a diplomatic solution with Iran. We don't want a military conflict with Iran. But we should never take the position that any deal is better than no deal. Any deal that allows Iran in 10 or 12 years to become a nuclear power is not a deal where you will feel safer in the world of the 21st century. So yes to a deal, but not just any deal. And so that's the message we're carrying to the White House today as our delegation is here in Montevideo. Please, other questions.
In the last months, we have seen some dramatic developments in Yemen and with Saudi Arabia involved. How is your organization standing on that, and if it's some kind of challenge in the Middle East for the next years?
Okay, thank you. Okay. For us in life, I think we all learn choices are not necessarily between good options and bad options. Sometimes choices in life, even for politicians and decision makers, are between bad options and worse options. This is a good example for me. Yemen is another example of Iranian expansion. And we now see Iran's hand, of course, in Iraq, which was frankly, unfortunately, a gift the United States gave to Iran because of the Iraq War of 2003. We see Iran in Syria as a partner of President Assad. We see Iran in Lebanon through Hezbollah. We see Iran in Gaza through Hamas. And now we see Iran in Yemen through the Houthis. I'm speaking only of the Middle East now. So we, as an organization, have no interest in seeing Iranian expansionism. Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States. It's a very good example of interests defeating values. When it comes to values, we don't have much in common with Saudi Arabia. Churches cannot open. Christians cannot pray except in secret. Jews have to lie if they apply for a visa because they will not accept Jews in the country, or at least they haven't in the past. Some people have to get a second passport because they have Israeli stamps in the passport. By the way, AJC was the first group in the world to enter Saudi Arabia with American passports that had Israeli stamps. Because they invited us to come quietly, and we said, if the condition is a new passport, we're not coming. We're not coming. We're not pretending that we're not Jewish. We're not pretending that Israel doesn't exist. And we're not pretending that we are not friends of Israel. So you want us? We're happy to come, but with one passport. And they blinked. And we were the first group in history to enter Saudi Arabia with Israeli stamps in our passports. So when it comes to values, I don't see much in Saudi Arabia. When it comes to interests, we have common interests with Saudi Arabia. Energy interests, geostrategic interests vis-a-vis Iran. We don't want to see Saudi Arabia fall to the hands of Shiite radicals either. Nor do we want to see Saudi Arabia fall into the hands of Islamic State. So again, I finished where I started. Choices in life are not always between good and bad, the perfect and the imperfect. Unfortunately, at times they're between bad, worse, and even worse. And I think this is one illustration of that.
My question has two parts. The first one is a thought that I have about this new deal between Iran and the US, that I think that the US maybe left Israel apart, maybe, and I think that's a result of Netanyahu's administration, I think maybe, and I don't know if you have any opinion about that. And the second part, that it's related to the first one, what if the agency has any general opinion about the Israel elections, the results.
Okay. Well, thank you. So the second part, Yana? Yavna. Daphne, sorry. Daphne. On the Israeli elections, the answer is no. I mean, each of us individually, if you turn around and you ask Roger or Steve or Gail right behind you, I'm sure individually they have their opinions. But as an organization, we don't have opinions. We have opinions on democracy. Israel's election was a democratic election. It was a fair election. It was a transparent election. I wish, personally, that Israel would change its political system a bit. To have 10 political parties in a parliament with 120 seats is nuts. And it means that you spend months, weeks, maybe months, negotiating with other parties to form a majority. It's amazing. Never in the history of Israel has one party achieved a majority. Never. Since 1948. It's never happened. So parties always have to negotiate. And sometimes the negotiation is not pretty. What will you do for me? What will I do for you? No, you want too much. No, you're not giving me enough. But it's certainly democratic. So we support the process. Second part, or the first part of your question, is, I think, more complicated for us. Because you drew a line between the Iran nuclear deal and the policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu, if I understood you. Did I understand you? Yeah. That's a little harder, because then in a university, we'd have to ask a different question. Would the result have been any different if there had been a different Israeli government? And we don't know the answer. And I don't think we can know the answer with any degree of certainty. What is interesting, though, is that the opposition party, led by Mr. Herzog, of the Labour Party, agrees with Mr. Netanyahu on Iran. They disagree on many things, economic policy, social policy, etc., etc., etc. On this issue, they completely agree. So even if Mr. Herzog had been elected prime minister, I'm not sure that the language might have been a little gentler, but the substance would have been the same. This deal endangers the very security and existence of the State of Israel. By the way, just one other thing, for those of you who watch Israeli politics, and it sounds like you do, it could be still that we're surprised and we end up seeing a Netanyahu-Herzog government. I think, and this is simply me speaking, this is not some secret message, especially in front of a camera. I think if you were to ask Prime Minister Netanyahu his preferred outcome of the negotiations internally, he would prefer, I think, to have the Labour Party as his partner. It would make his relation with the United States and the world a lot simpler. So I wouldn't bet money on it, but I would not exclude that possibility in the coming days and weeks. So thank you for your questions. Anything else? Any other world problems we want to solve together this morning? No? Last one? No. Thank you all very much for coming.